Welcome everybody. We'd first like to thank you all for coming. We're the Aeritae Consulting Group, and we're working on a secure password validation program with our mentor, Chris. My name's Taylor, and I'm going to start us off by giving you a brief overview of what we're going to be talking about today. First, we'll kind of talk about our project big picture, who Aeritae is as a company, and the project that they brought to us. Next, we'll talk about the road so far, the progress we've made, and kind of where we stand right now. Then we'll talk about where do we go from here, what we have planned for the rest of the semester, and then we'll round it up with a Q&A section where you guys can ask any questions that you have. So big picture, I want to start off by saying that Aeritae is a wonderful company, and we're so happy we've been partnered with them. They're a fairly small company located in St. Paul, Minnesota, and what I love so much about them is that they are customer focused. They're dedicated to maximizing their customers' performance, improving their operations, and helping them develop innovative new service solutions. And they do all of this using ServiceNow. ServiceNow, it's a large platform with a lot of functionalities that can be customized to the needs of all their different clients. Our Capstone project is working on ServiceNow's password validation system. So I'd like to start off by saying that Aeritae didn't come to us with a problem. They came to us with an opportunity. And this distinction is important to me because they already have basic password validation. You know, they check a couple different types of characters, the length of the password, and all of that is great. That's not a problem. But the opportunity is there's more that we can do, and there's more that we should be doing. Because how many of us have used a password recently? Yesterday, today, the last week? My guess is 99 to 100% of us have used a password in the last 24 hours, or even the last 4 hours. Maybe you logged into Facebook, YouTube, or you checked your email, your bank accounts, or maybe you even entered a password to look on your phone. Everyone who uses technology nowadays uses a password at some point or another. Why? Well, we want to protect ourselves and our information from unauthorized access and use. In a word, privacy. Now, the stronger a password is, the more useful it is for protecting that data. And the strength of the password depends on its uniqueness and its composition. For example, password is not a very secure password, but something like SonicStraw6392 ! Is much more secure because it's complex and hard to guess. However, because it's more complex, it's hard to remember, hard to type, and a lot of us don't like using them. So how does a company like Aeritae, or any company for that matter, get its users to use these stronger, more complex passwords? Well, we do it by setting requirements for passwords and enforcing those requirements. Now, I do want to clarify one point. Our project isn't about making sure a password is correct when a user logs into their account. ServiceNow already does that. We're concerned with making sure a password meets our requirements when a user first sets their password or when they change it on their account. As I said, Aeritae already has basic password validation. They check for an uppercase character, lowercase, a special character, a number, and that the length is at least 8 characters. And this is great. This is what you'll find on most websites and programs on the market today. Our task was to add a few more requirements to the list. Now, a good password is one that's changed often. So we want to compare the current password that the user is proposing to use with their last 10, so that they're not just recycling their password over and over. Basically, this requirement means that when we ask a user to change their password, we want to make sure that that password actually changes. Now, a good password is also something that's not easily guessed. So that's our last 2 requirements here. We want to make sure that the password isn't on the list of the top 100 most common passwords on the internet. Some of these passwords include password, series of numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, series of keys on the keyboard like QWERTY or ASDF. One of 2018's top passwords was the word sunshine. Now, some of these don't meet our requirements for other reasons. Either they're not long enough, they don't have the right types of characters, but we're concerned with their commonality, how common they are, and how easy they are to guess. Personal information also makes passwords vulnerable because they can be guessed as well. It doesn't take much digging in today's society for a hacker to find information on us. Our name, our address, birthday, anniversary, things like this. So we want to discourage our users from using things like this. For example, I wouldn't want my password to be Taylor123, easy to guess. Or even the name of my cat, Charlotte. People who know me or people who have scrolled through my Facebook probably know the name of my cat. So how do we check this personal information? Unfortunately, we can't check all of it. We don't have a lot of this information for our users. So right now we're focusing on names. First name, last name, username. We don't want these in the password. In the future, we would like to check other information, address, and things like this. But first, we have to ask for that information from our users when they set up their account. All right. So now I've already touched on the value of our solution, mainly the security that it has. But I want to emphasize why it's important. It's not only important for Aeritae, but for their clients as well. As I said, Aeritae is customer focused, so increasing security is one way that they can better serve their customers. And then their customers can better serve their customers, so on and so forth. But better password security isn't just good business. It's the next logical step for any company who wants to operate in today's marketplace. Hacks and security breaches happen all the time. It's a part of our way of life. Technology has changed the way we look at privacy, and password validation, password security are part of that new era. So stronger passwords and enforcement of stronger passwords not only benefits the company, but its clients and the community as a whole. So now that I've kind of talked your ear off and given you an overview of our big picture, I'm going to hand it over to my partner Lee here, and he's going to talk to you about our roads so far.
Thanks, Taylor. Hi, everyone. I'm Lee, and I'm going to talk to you about the progress we have made so far this semester. This being our midterm presentation means we have halfway through our project, at least a while. We have gone through 2 sprints so far, with 2 more to go. We had estimated that our progress would be about 40% right now. Currently, however, we have only completed just over 70% of total workload. Now we admittedly are behind on our project, but that doesn't mean we haven't made progress. We have a proof of concept webpage that gives a taste of what we are aiming to do with our project. We also are currently connecting the page to a database within ServiceNow so we can add some features that require outside information, such as comparing against the user's last 10 passwords. And we have integrated our code with a service platform. Once we connect the page to database, we will be able to make better progress, but we will talk more about that later. For now, I'm going to turn our presentation over to Ben, who will show you what we have so far.
Thank you, Lee. Hello, my name is Ben. Now, for the sake of time and making sure everything goes according to plan, we're going to be using screenshots instead of a live demo. We do have a live version, which we can bring up in the Q&A if anybody wants to see specifics or things aren't unclear as we walk through the demo. Yeah, we'll have questions later on. All right. So originally, ServiceNow had a very bare bones system. When you're resetting your password, you just enter your password and re-enter it like a common password resetting process. Sorry. So that's real bare bones, and we wanted to improve on that. So this was our first prototype. This is what we ended up creating after our first sprint, and then as a proof of concept, just to make sure we were on the right page to show our sponsor and make sure this is what they wanted. So this is already an improvement based off of the bare bones original template they gave us. Previously, they did not have the password must contain following. It was very clunky to use. You'd put in your new password and you'd hit submit, and it would give you an error like you do not have a number and you don't have a special character, and you'd have to continuously click submit hoping you met all the requirements eventually. So we added the easy to follow requirements straight up front. It also checks that basic stuff like the password you entered originally is the one you enter at the end. Unfortunately, this one is still clunky, however, and it still falls prey to the, if you fat finger a key, let's say you meant to put a capital, but you didn't hold shift for some reason. Everybody fat fingers something. This wouldn't tell you you had messed up until you hit the submit button, which is always frustrating. When you think you typed it correctly and you swore you did, you type the password all the time, but it just doesn't work. And maybe you re-enter it again and you get a different error, but you don't know where it happened or when. And if you met the requirements of 8 minimal characters, it could be hard to pinpoint where it is. So, as a result, in our second sprint, we had 3 goals during our second sprint. We wanted to make it more user-friendly in the terms of dynamic feedback for password requirements. So you see on some web pages now, as you're typing in a password, it notifies you when you meet a requirement. So we added the colored list at the bottom of the page. You can see that informs the user whether or not they've met a requirement. And as they begin to fill out the information, in this case they entered a lowercase, the list will update showing green for the things they've met. During the sprint, we also had hoped to put CAPTCHA onto the bottom for this form submission to prevent bots or repetitive spamming to pick up stuff, but due to the fact that it's hosted by Google, we came into some issues when integrating it with the page, so that is going to be our next user beneficial quality of life update. Now, unfortunately, during our second sprint, we didn't manage to connect it to the ServiceNow database. During sprints 1 and 2, we were learning a lot about the ServiceNow platform none of us had had experience with. And connecting to the database allows us to pull that personal information, make sure their passwords aren't matching the previous ones, make sure there's no personal information. And once we get that, we can start digging in deep to the more technical functions that we wanted to finish with the project. To continue on with this prototype, though, it also updates real time. Every time you enter a character or delete a character, it will update the list. This is done by making, every time they enter something, checking the string, making sure it meets requirements. If it doesn't meet the requirement, the text is highlighted red using CSS. Otherwise, if it is valid, it goes green. This is what it will look like after they've met every password requirement. However, when they've re-entered a password, it doesn't match. Yeah, with that, very unintuitive black text. So we have updated this already to make this more user-friendly in terms of showing more clearly error messages like your passwords didn't match, which can be shown in the live demo later on. However, we didn't use the live demo because it's not as stable or predictable as the screenshots. And this is what it will look like after everything is set and good. Passwords have met all the requirements and both passwords match. After this happens, when it is eventually connected to the ServiceNow database, this password will overwrite the previous password, and the previous password will be added to the most recently used 10 passwords that we are going to be checking against in the future. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Lee to talk about issues so far.
Thank Thank you, Ben. Earlier, I mentioned that we hadn't made the type of progress that we had hoped it. Now I would like to talk a little more about that. Coming into this project, we all had decent experience with JavaScript, the main language we are using in our project, but none of us had much experience with Set API, and we had absolutely no experience with ServiceNow API, and due to that, we spent most of Spears 1 and a large part of Spears 2 doing training for ServiceNow and trying to get our brains on what's the project entailed and how we are going to accomplish it, which left less time for us to work on the project itself. Due to these issues, our velocity has suffered greatly. To accomplish our project on time, our velocity should have been in the double digits, but for Spears 1, it was 5, and Spears 2 clouded at 3. As I mentioned before, we have only completed about 7% of our project instead of estimated 45%. So if our velocity continues as an average of 4, we are only managed to complete about 14% of our project. So now these numbers are definitely not where we want them. And I'm going to turn this over to Andrew, who will tell you where we go from here.
Thank you, Lee. So now, now to understand where we are coming from, oh, I'm Andrew, by the way, forgot to tell you that. To understand where we are coming from, we need to look at the 2 important lessons that we have learned from this project. Lesson number 1, easy to comprehend, hard to figure out. In the beginning, the project seemed pretty straightforward. Just create a validation system. We understood what they were asking for, and in theory, it would be quick to make. Unfortunately, in practice, that is not the case, as we stumbled upon some of the learning roadblocks, like Lee stated, with the REST API and ServiceNow. So that doesn't help. Lesson number 2 was the level of work. We bit off more than we can chew there. So when we actually created 21 user stories, when looking more at it, we could have just made 10. That would have fulfilled enough of them. But don't get me wrong, those were great user stories with ideas and features we wanted to add, but they were kind of out of the scope of the project as well as out of our time frame. We would not be able to implement all of them within, as shown by our velocity. In fact, some of those story points to which we had given 2 or 3 points, in actuality, they should have been a 5 or an 8. Some examples of user stories that we could have dropped were delete my account. We put that as one of them, but again, that's out of the scope of the project, so we are not going to be doing that one. So what's next for us? Oh, sorry, jumped ahead of me. So what's next for us? Well, our first task is going to be refocusing our priorities. We're going to come together and reevaluate the story and the project. Once we have that done and get our estimates in order, we'll finish the rest of the project. Now, but our main priority now will be finishing the requirements that were set forth in the solution slide. So, of course, that's the last 10 used by the user, top 100 most frequently used, and of course, checking for users' personal information, specifically their names. Overall, while our progress has been curbed by necessary training with ServiceNow, we are planning to make great strides in the last half of the semester. Thank you for your time today, and we will now open the presentation up for Q&A.
Seeing as this is dealing with password validation and the fact that there's the personal information aspect of this, how much of the password validation will be done in client side versus will be done server side to when what information may actually get sent to the user?
So it's probably going to be done mostly server side. The issue we're facing right now is we've created a table in ServiceNow. So ServiceNow has its own developer instance that every client can make and change, including tables, widgets, anything really. So the stuff would be sent from the ServiceNow servers from the table and sent to the client to check, but then that would be done.
So you mentioned a little bit about how like password wouldn't allow like your name or your pet's name. Are there certain dictionary words that you're not going to allow?
Password.
Like how do you come to the decision that which words you not allow and which words you would allow?
So there are a lot of lists that get made every year, like Time, like all these magazines. They always come up with the top 100 most common passwords. So we will most likely take from a most recent list, either update regularly or require a manual input of a new list of words, and it'll cross-reference the new password with that list as the user inputs it.
Well, what's your end goal here? Are you guys just doing a proof of concept, or are you looking to go live with this on the platform?
The goal is to go live. So right now we're creating a widget on ServiceNow that hopefully can be used by any client or user that uses the website. So it would be something, it wouldn't be a default, it would be something a client could install onto their own personal ServiceNow developer page.
Any other questions?
One comment and one question. You had the things in red and they're turning to green.
Yep.
I might suggest putting a checkbox instead because
So
color.
that's a good point. That is an improvement we've made since then. Yeah.
And then I really like the CAPTCHA thing.
Uh-huh.
I'm hoping that wasn't one that got cut on
No.
Oh, no.
That's in progress, but isn't yet.
We, in fact, Lee here was working on it this morning.
Yeah. It's still, yeah, that is the one, that's one of the users' stories we're going to keep. There were some, like, send verification emails, stuff that isn't exactly needed, but would be a nice feature. But when it comes to how many user points we have, those greatly inflated our totals, which affected our velocity overall. So there's a lot of those early on that were suggested that we thought would be nice, but they were stretch goals, which diluted how much velocity we eventually
One such question, one of those user stories was security questions. You know, like the classic, oh hey, what's your first pet's name? You know, that kind of security question. But that's a stretch goal that might not make it into the time frame.
Factoring in also the last 10 passwords used, will there be any checks or guards in the system to prevent you from just doing whatever old password is 1, 2, 3, 4, and just appending numbers ad infinitum?
It's, again, one of our stretch goals, since it's a lot harder to check, but it is on our list of things we want to look out for, because that is a very common thing people do.
I know I do.
Yeah.
Question on your guys' velocity. So I think your proposals for fixing it was to clarify a better understanding of the stories and get your points correct. Another one was cutting some scope. I think your projection was with your current velocity was about 14%. Implementing those two fixes, what does that do to your project? About how much do you project to get done?
So we probably, we have 10 stretch goals that realistically going in, when we first created them, we thought maybe were possible. But as the project went on, we learned ServiceNow was a lot harder to learn and get into. A lot of the technical things that we put a lot of user story points into, like checking against the top 10 passwords or their previous 10 passwords or the top 100. They required database to be connected to the ServiceNow table that we're trying to connect to now, and we assign them considerably more points. And once we get over the roadblock of getting it integrated with ServiceNow completely, progress should go much faster once we get it connected.
If this was our own website, much faster, but because ServiceNow is already established, it's not just the front end and the back end.
Do you guys have a projection on where you think they'll end up?
So I guess I kind of break it up into two things. So we have the requirements that were asked of us. So those are our basic requirements. We're shooting to have 100% of that completed. For the stretch goals, will probably remain about that 5, 10, 15%. But the ones that were asked of us should be 100% complete.
Yes.
Any more questions?
Thank you.